So I've made this video for October the 29th, which is known as Gurdjieff's death day, the day he left his mortal coil. So I wanted to discuss some of Gurdjieff in the public eye, and Paul Beekman Taylor did a wonderful book on this. And this is covering some of the accounts of Gurdjieff and how he was regarded in the newspapers and in the magazines and reports on him, as it says here. And I found it interesting, for example, that Gurdjieff's group was on the cover of the Daily News. There is the group doing some kind of dance at the same time as the announcement about Lord Carnarvon and Tutankhamun discovery. I like all this. I'll show you some more pictures in a moment of. I think it's just interesting that the Egypt discovery of the boy pharaoh was around the same time as Gurdjieff's being in the newspapers. And Gurdjieff talked quite a bit about Egypt and what was coming from it. This is one of the reports, was calling him and his group at Fontainebleau the forest philosophers. So I'll show you some more of this. So Paul Beekman Taylor's put together this fantastic book, and it's got some wonderful pictures in it of Fontainebleau, and this is part of the Temple Mystique. And those that know about Fontainebleau, this was the Institute of the Harmonious Development of Man that Gurdjieff set up there, and had many people come over the years. And this is them doing some of the dances, the temple dances that he brought. Well, this is from other religions, ancient temples. The dances had a significance in that they were passing on esoteric knowledge. As we know, we have three centers: mind, body, emotions, and we need to work on all of them to help us understand the ancient wisdom. So he used to get people working in the gardens of Fontainebleau, and this was part of the, well, they had this air hanger, I believe it was, and around the sides of it was written all the aphorisms, and many of them were written in the alphabet that Gurdjieff put together himself, that he kind of designed because he wanted to bring forth a new way of speaking and reading, because as we know, many words have many different meanings these days, or have lost their original meanings, and some have even become inversed. So people will be doing the dancing and the exercises inside the well, it's not a tent, like I say, it was part of an air hanger that he managed to get hold of, and they put together, and it had cushions all around the side. And this was like a little place where he sat, apparently. It looks rather grand, doesn't it? But I can see how it's got a kind of that nomadic tent feeling about it, where he would sit cross-legged. Oh, to have a time machine to go back and look at Fontainebleau as it was when Gurdjieff was running it. So we've got here the Daily Mirror's, on the front page, a full article all about Gurdjieff and the Fontainebleau group, the Institute of the Harmonious Development of Man. And they were being called a forest temple of a new mystic cult, and they were being called the forest philosophers because where this house is, which I believe used to be a monastery before it became Gurdjieff's Institute for the Harmonious Development of Man, it was surrounded by a forest, and I can just imagine that. It must have been wonderful. I have been to Fontainebleau. It's all built up now, and you can see the forest, or the remains of the forest, on the outskirts of the, well, I suppose it's a town now. But I'm sure back then when he was living there, it was a much smaller place. And there's many esotericists have been to Fontainebleau. It has quite a calling. I know Blavatsky went there for some time. I believe Eliphas Levi visited there, and Crowley himself, Aleister Crowley, the great beast. I myself, when I was there, felt quite a magical vibe about it, but because I was quite enthralled by being, or to me, walking in Gurdjieff's footsteps, I probably wasn't tuning in properly, but I would like to go back there. So this again, that's the study house, the air hangar that he bought to do the exercises and the dances in. And we've got various photographs of some of the students working, doing their various physical jobs. You know, obviously the gardens needed to be sorted. They were growing their own food. They had like a little mini farm going on there. So here's Gurdjieff again on the front page of the Daily News. Once again, next to the story about Tutankhamun being found. So we've got the Egyptian connection again. But Gurdjieff's here is talking about the new cult, an interview with the master. And it's discussing all the mystic dances that he was put on. It says here, perfumes that vary every hour. I'll have to look that bit up for you and find out what that means. So we've got Gurdjieff here next to the boy king's sarcophagus. Again, we've got some more ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs down here. And I think that many of the movements that Gurdjieff was putting together are Egyptian related. I can see how some of the stances that he has people in are like the statues from the ancient Egyptian era, the way they're standing. And like we've got here, you can see they're always in profile. But if I look at some of the movements, I can see it's almost resembling what they were doing. It's like he was bringing alive these ancient styles or these ancient dances and stances for people to, what I think is a very good connection. I actually do Egyptian Qigong, which helps one to connect with the Egyptian gods, obviously, but it also helps one become aware of how the Egyptians used to act when they were doing their positions and their postures. Maybe I should do a little show on the Egyptian Qigong at some point. But so we've got Tutankhamun's splendid treasures, and then we've got the splendid treasure of Gurdjieff himself, the master. Well, this is quite a strange article. It's called Behind the Scenes at Gurdjieff's Weird Chateau of Mysteries. But this is just down to, reporters that didn't understand what spiritual teaching was or what development is. To them, these are people that are so asleep and so close-minded that they think people like Gurdjieff and those that follow him are all crazy people. But are we the crazy people? Or is it those that throw silly titles such as Behind the Scenes at Gurdjieff's Weird Chateau of Mysteries? Maybe they're the weird ones in that they're not ready to look at other ways of living. They're too busy being mechanical and asleep and just being programmed and following a way that they've been told to live, where we're trying to become people that live, to be awake. Life is real only then when I am. So even though he might have looked like he had lots of bad publicity, it really was just by ignoramuses that were writing this kind of thing, people that were very asleep and didn't want to do something that would make them have to think for themselves, would make them have to think more deeply about life, the reasons for it and what they're actually doing with it. Because many people don't like having to question about themselves and who they are. And we know that by doing this kind of work, it does make you have to look at yourself. Many people don't like looking at themselves either. So in this article again, we've got the dances, the temple dances. There's the Institute of Harmonious Development. And if you look back at some of my older films, I have done a film all about Gurdjieff's Institute, so you can see all my photographs from the time when I was there. Now, Gurdjieff was in the papers quite a bit, really. You don't often see mystics in the papers today. It's not something people are that interested in, I suppose, but I don't know, I feel like newspapers and mainstream media want to ridicule people like this rather than, though I suppose back in the days of Gurdjieff they were trying to ridicule him as well, but at the same time they knew they But he came to help people. Actually here it says, comes to save America. Mr. Gurdjieff's come to save America. And he did try. You can read about his American adventures in his books. Definitely, one of the biggest chapters is about America in Beelzebub's Tales to his grandson. So we've got here, G.I. Gurdjieff, head of the recently founded cult, the Institute for the Harmonious Development of Man, has arrived in New York with the avowed purpose of saving America despite themselves. God bless America. And God bless the soul of Mr. George Ivanovich Gurdjieff. And I'm just going to finish with one of the reports that's in this book by Paul Beekman Taylor. So this was one of an articles written about Gurdjieff, a Russian Gurdjieff brings a new Orientalism. To the devotee, his religion is more than a matter of life and death. It is a matter of eternal salvation or damnation. But to the anthropologist, it is largely a matter of climate. The temperate zone produces religions that are active, ethical, objective, while the invariating heat of the tropics leads to religions that are quiescent, contemplative, subjective. Interesting, eh? It is doubtful if one of these types ever can successfully invade the other's territory. The vigorous religions of the cooler lands have sent their missionaries to India's coral strands, but India has gone on with its age-old dreams, and India has sent its swamis and yogis to convert the hustling northern lands. But they go on with their hustling and refuse to contemplate. One of the most recent of these missionaries is a Russian, G.I. Gurdjieff, though we all know he wasn't Russian, head of the Institute for the Harmonious Development of Man. The main branch of this society is at the Château de Prairie, Fontainebleau, France. This society, according to its pamphlet, is practically a continuation of the society that went under the name of the Seekers After Truth. So this society was founded in 1895 by a group of various specialists, including doctors, archaeologists, priests, painters, etc., whose aim was to study in close collaboration so-called supernatural phenomena, in which each of them was interested from a particular point of view. Mr. Gurdjieff, with a number of his pupils, is now in New York, giving exhibitions of the work of his cult and seeking support and adherents. According to Mr. Gurdjieff, our present civilization is all wrong, for he writes, "The civilization of our time, with its unlimited means for extending its influence, has wrenched man from the normal conditions in which he should be living. It is true that civilization has opened up for man new paths in the domains of knowledge, science and economic life, and thereby enlarged his world perception. But instead of raising him to a higher all-round level of development, civilization has developed only certain sides of his nature to the detriment of other faculties, some of which it has destroyed altogether. Civilization has robbed man of the natural advantage of his type, without at the same time providing him with what was needed for the harmonious development of a new type. And from an individually finished man, normally adapted to the nature and the environment in which he was placed and which created him, civilization has produced a being torn from his element, unfitted for life, and a complete stranger to all the conditions of his present mode of existence. There is a remedy. Our psychic centres are disconnected. We have three of them: intellectual, emotional, and instinctive. The first does nothing but think, the second only feels, and the third only lives by his instincts and motor functions. There are three separate persons living in each of us, and not living amicably together at all. These three men in one never understand one another. Consciously and unconsciously they frustrate the plans, the intentions, and the work of one another. The solution is to bring these three selves into harmony. As Mr. Gurdjieff says, the work of the centres must be of equal intensity at one time, and then the three main wheels of the human machine will work smoothly without obstructing one another and with the highest efficiency. The programme is divided into three sections. The first study includes the science of relativity, the science of numbers, the science of symbols, alchemy, oriental medicine, comparative religious religion, psychology and philosophy. The second part is the practical section, and this takes up harmonic rhythm, music, singing, plastics, oriental sacred dances, drawing, market, gardening and languages. The third is the medical section, and this includes healing by gymnastics, water cure, light cure, electrotherapy, psychotherapy, dietetics and duliotherapy. Most of this has a rather strange and fantastic sound to the average American. He is even inclined to smile at the thought of himself or his wife taking up, for instance, oriental sacred dances or duliotherapy. But let him not scoff. There are considerable numbers of people who take it all in great seriousness. Such cults seem to make their strongest appeals at such times as this, when people are reacting from intense strain. It seems at first glance to be a very self-centered program, but no doubt the individual, when he has struck a proper balance in his own nature, will learn to adjust himself to this neighbour as well. I'm just going to go down to the footnote here. So we've got duliotherapy. Greek dulios, slave, church Latin dulio, veneration according to saints, is serving another without question or restraint. Now, I think it quite interesting, after all that's been going on in the shit show of the last few years, that people are coming to Gurdjieff and Steiner. They are looking for ways to go forward and develop themselves. And so this is a very interesting time for all of us to be living in, and we need it to be working upon ourselves, whether we're reconnecting with the ancient gods or working on ourselves. But I do recommend John Beekman Taylor's book, Gurdjieff in the Public Eye, if people want to find out more about what Gurdjieff was like in the public eye and how people were reading about him and saying about him. And he also has some great accounts of quite famous names that used to go and visit him. So I thank you all for listening and watching, and may Mr. Gurdjieff's soul rest in peace.